a gentleman of our day, who was terribly subject to gout, being urged by his physicians to abstain altogether from salt meats, was wont to reply jocosely that in the paroxysms and torture of the disease, he wanted to have something to lay the blame on, and that, storming and cursing at one time about sausage, at another about tongue, and again about ham, he felt greatly relieved. But in all seriousness, as, when the arm is raised to strike, it annoys us if the blow meets no object, but is wasted on the air, and as, to make a view pleasant to the eye, it must not be lost and spread out to the dim horizon, but should have rising ground to limit it within a reasonable distance, as a wind loses its strength, meeting with no opposition from a dense forest, and is dissipated in the void. So it would seem that the mind, when disturbed and excited, goes astray of itself, if we do not give it something to lay hold of, and it must always be supplied with some object to seize and work upon. Plutarch says, speaking of those who become attached to monkeys and little dogs, that the affectionate part of us, in this way, for lack of a legitimate object, fashions a false and frivolous one rather than remain useless. And we see that the mind, when most excited, deceives itself, setting up a false and fanciful object, even contrary to its own belief, rather than not act against something. So the anger of wild animals drives them to attack the stone or the spear which has wounded them, and to take vengeance on themselves with their own teeth for the pain they suffer. So the Pannonian bear, the fiercer after being wounded by the Libyan lance hurled at her by its slender thong, turns upon the wound and furiously assaults the shaft lodged in her, and circles about the dart that flees with her. What causes do we not invent for the misfortunes that befall us? What do we not take offense at, rightly or wrongly, in order to have something to spar with? It was not those fair locks that you are tearing, or the whiteness of that breast, which in anger you beat so cruelly, that killed your beloved brother with a miserable bit of lead. Turn your wrath elsewhere. Livy, speaking of the Roman army in Spain after the loss of the two brothers, its great captains, says, all burst into tears and beat their heads. That is a common custom. And the philosopher Bion, did he not remark facetiously of that king, who in his grief tore out his hair? Does he think that baldness is a cure for grief, who has not seen men chew and swallow cards and gulp down dice, by way of revenge for the loss of their money? Xerxes whipped the Hellespont, and branded it, and caused numberless insults to be heaped upon it, and sent a challenge to Mount Athos. And Cyrus delayed a whole army for several days, that he might avenge himself on the river Gindus, for the alarm he had had in crossing it. And Caligula destroyed a very beautiful house, because of the suffering his mother had endured in it. In my youth it was said by the common people, that one of our neighboring kings, having received a scourging at God's hands, swore to be revenged upon him, and decreed that for 10 years no one should pray to or speak of him, and that, so long as he himself had authority, no one should believe in him. The intention of which tale was not so much to depict the folly as the vainglory natural to the nation of which it was told. These vices are always found together, but such actions are due, in truth, rather more to presumption than to stupidity. Augustus Caesar, having been beaten about by a storm at sea, undertook to brave the god Neptune, and, in the celebration of the games, in the circus, had his statue removed from its place among the other gods, as his revenge upon him, in which he was even less excusable than those already spoken of, and less than he himself was later. When, Quintilius Varus having lost a battle in Germany, he went about in rage and despair, beating his head against the wall and shouting, Varus, give me back my soldiers, for they go beyond all degrees of folly, since impiety is added to it, who attack God himself. Now, as that poet of old says, quoted by Plutarch, 'tis vain to be angered with things, they care not a rap for a rap. But we shall never say enough in derision of the disorderliness of our mind,